should I say ciao? Hi, welcome to the
Ciao.
On Point podcast.
Thank you.
So nice to have you. I've been following you online, and I know a couple of people who've done a training with you. You are a yoga teacher and you have your own method. Maybe you want to introduce that yourself.
Sure. Um, in fact, I call it an approach, what I do. And it's been many years, probably the last 15 years of exploring different ways and adding and synthesizing and integrating my own experience and practice has brought me to something that I call yoga somatics. So it is a blend between classical yoga, a lot of tantric elements, or this work with polarities and sensations and that kind of thing, and blending that in with modern somatic methods and modern somatic ways of being in contact with the body. So
Mm.
a name is a name, you know. It was always so hard to come up with something, and I didn't want to call it Ateeka yoga because every time a person practices this, it's their practice in a way.
Mm.
So it wouldn't be the same if you were to practice it and you call it Ateeka yoga because you would be doing Iselin yoga, no? Um, so,
Yeah.
but we call it yoga somatics. Yeah, a blend between yoga asana and somatic practice.
Yeah, I've read on your website that you have had like a really long journey with yoga and tantric studies and all of that. And I think that from my perspective, I see a lot of um, there's a lot of things happening in the somatic world and within
Mm.
research, but a lot of people don't really know what somatics is. So maybe you can just explain that for people who have never heard of it.
Yeah, sure. It's really interesting. Like you mentioned, a lot of people haven't heard the word somatics, or it's just starting and maybe in the last 5 years to get really well known, or to the words on the table for sure, this word of somatics. And somatics is a really big umbrella, truly. Sort of like yoga. The word yoga is a really big umbrella for many different kind of practices. The word somatics was actually coined only, I think it was about 1969 by Thomas Hanna, who was an American movement researcher and practitioner. And basically, soma, or it comes from a Greek root meaning of the body. So, somatics really is the practice of being aware of our own movements and also being aware, having a first, this is a good way to put it, having a first person experience of what's happening in your own body. Because so often in fitness and this world we've been raised up in, most of us in the Western world, there's been a lot of conditions about how a body should look or how we should feel or how we should be aligned. The big should, you know?
Mm.
And somatics has been a nice passing over to having a first person, or how I feel when I practice downward facing dog, or how I feel, how my body feels the sensation of that shaping in a way. And different teachers have different ways. Some are a little bit more structured. For example, Feldenkrais method or Hana somatics. Mine is a more based in the fluid system and how the fluid moves through the body. But all of them are under this umbrella of somatics. And in a way, it's a taking back of our own movement and a taking back of our own sensation in our own bodies. So
Mm.
for me, it's been a nice blend.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I come from a dance background and
I
I can,
heard that.
yeah, and I can see that, I've done like classical ballet, the rigid,
Mm.
but also like really contact improv and a lot of improv in general. And yeah, I just feel like the somatic way is is my
Mm.
way of, embodying, this vessel.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, just like coming back to our core instead of being so, like you said, conditioned.
Hmm. Hmm. You know, one of my mentors in somatic practice was a woman called Emily Conrad. Have you heard of Emily Conrad, of continuum movement?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I think is so fascinating, Emily came. She passed away now a couple of years ago. She was 79 when she left the body, but she was a great influence on somatics while she was alive. And she came from a dance background. She was raised up in Brooklyn, or maybe it was Queens, actually, somewhere in New York, and raised up during the time of really innovative dance back in the 50s and 60s. And of course, her first training had a lot to do with classical dance as well. And she would talk about, when we were working with her much later in her life, how classical dance was developed so that the people way up in the balcony seats could see the movements in a way. So these grand sweeping arms, or these big movements with your legs and the pointed toe, and that would fit the cultural norm of the time. It would be pleasant and non-threatening for somebody to see. Yet if somebody was to move little movements with their fingers that maybe look like an octopus tentacle or something like that, it's a little one, you couldn't see it from the balcony seats where the king and the queen would sit, right? And second of all, it would be a little unnerving to see these small, intimate movements. So she kind of made this big spectrum between the classical dance and then coming into these really small movements that maybe like you pick up on in contact improv or other modern methods. So it's really interesting that you have that dance background too, and you really know where it comes from. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it so interesting. And, a lot of yoga is very like, maybe there are more rigid styles, we could say, and, focused on the poses and that aspect. And I've enjoyed practicing a lot of these styles too. But yeah, my last training, my teachers, they have studied a lot of somatic healing and tantric non-dual Shaiva Tantra, which I was so happy to be introduced to. I just felt like I was finally at home within this world.
Yeah, definitely.
You have your own training coming up now. A new training, online.
Yeah. We've been doing trainings for a while, but now with this whole online and with Corona time and all that, we get to, like you're doing too, to be very innovative about how we're working with trainings. And so the next one coming up is a restorative yoga, or somatics meets restorative yoga. I've been teaching restorative for about 25 years. And to be honest with you, I think really popular when I first started teaching yoga, because everybody, the t-shirt, I'm just here for the shavasana, that everybody that we see for a while. I think that's actually what a lot of people really come for is for the rest, and to give themselves permission to rest. So I had a good success with restorative yoga. Also way back in my early days in Hawaii when I was teaching it there. Yet over the time that somatics has come into my life, it seems like I like to blend in also small movements, transitions, being aware and mindful movement of the body, different ways of being soft movements in between the more neutral and static asanas. So it's one of my favorite trainings to do because it's really accessible for almost any person, any human, because we all need to rest. Yet it also has those little space that we can also move. So it's not just a clunky from position to position. We get to start to explore a little bit how the body moves in between stillness. So in a way, little islands and oceans. So I'm looking forward to that. And we do a 3-month journey so that there's some time to integrate every week into this practice instead of just a weekend. We learn better that way, I think.
Absolutely. That's so important, to integrate and have time and space to do that. And it sounds amazing. So you're offering it online.
Yeah.
So I will link your website and the training and everything below. And I mean, you've been teaching teachers for years now. And I mean, I want to dive more into your whole journey, but you are now in Oslo, but I know that you also lived maybe more before Corona times, part-time in Sardinia in Italy too. Yeah, so we can get into that later on as well. But tell us more, like, where are you from?
Yeah, I grew up in Colorado. So I'm 50. I'm going to be 51 this year, actually. So I grew up in Colorado back, I guess, in the 70s. And shortly after I was 18, I decided I needed to get closer to the ocean and sort of skip that. So I kept going a little bit closer, Utah, California. And then by the time I was in my early 20s, I ended up in Maui, which is one of the Hawaiian islands. Little bit longer story getting me there, but that's where I ended up, and that's where I really feel like I started to grow up, and that's where my yoga journey also began. Um, I was very sick with anorexia nervosa, so I had a very severe eating disorder between about age 19 and 22, and I was basically starving myself. Something happened though along the way. I'm making these many year passages towards the West Coast, living on the West Coast a little bit. And then by accident, not really accident, but just by sort of happen chance, I went to vacation on Maui. And when I hit Maui, for the first time in many years, I started to eat.
Mm,
So and
wow.
I started to feel, and I could really honestly, maybe it sounds a little dramatic, but I remember the fruit that I
Yeah.
started to eat when I was in Hawaii, and it was off the tree and juicy and sensual and ripe, and it triggered a healing response in me. Something about that. It was very fascinating to reflect back on it. And
Yeah.
before that, I hadn't done very much yoga. I'd heard about it a little bit, but that little trigger of that healing response then got me to start to move a little closer to um, being in contact with my body, because the
Mm,
eating disorder really took me far away from my body, at least
yeah.
feeling my body. Um, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I could just imagine like living on Maui. That would be healing in and of itself. And just like the luscious,
Yeah.
ripe fruit straight from the tree. Like it just seems like heaven on earth.
In a way, it really was a little bit like a Garden of Eden. It really was a healing place. I went on vacation, and then I was with my mom on vacation actually for a couple of weeks, and we went back to California where we were living. And I said, "Well, I'm leaving in 1 month. I'm going back to Maui." And she said, "Oh, right, you're going to go back there." And I said, "Yeah, I'll go." She says, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, what am I going to do? I'm waiting tables, I was a waitress." And so I sold the few things I had, went to Maui, and got back to the fruit in a way. So,
Oh, I love
but it's
that
so
story. Yeah.
interesting, this sort of the sensuality, and
Mm,
not necessarily the sexuality, but the sensuality of living barefoot and near the sea. That time it was much less developed place. Now maybe it's been a little overdeveloped now, but there was such a symbol towards turning the key of my sensuality in a way that I think was part of the connection back to my healing. And
mm.
now, many, many years later, and I have healed from that. It took me about 10 years to heal the eating disorder. So it wasn't just a papaya that did it.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but
can
that was maybe the
imagine.
key. There
Yeah.
was a lot of yoga, a lot of therapy, a lot of acupuncture, a lot of different kinds of things. But looking way back, so that was over 25 years ago, I see now, even in the way that I practice now, what continues to heal me is to come closer to my sensuality.
Mm,
And what continues to, when I feel far away from myself, I'm not so much in contact with that aspect of myself. Now I know the way back
yeah.
if I choose to go there. Um, and I think that's what I like to share also with other people. It's mostly women that are in my groups. Maybe for this reason, I don't know. But for a person, I'll say a woman, to start to be in contact with her own sensuality, whatever that means for her. And it may not be um, a cultural explanation of sensuality. It's not necessarily like pull up lace stockings, although it could be. But it might
Yeah.
be the feeling of when we are putting a lotion on our skin after the shower, or feeling the breath in our body when we move or rest, you know? So I think
Mhm.
it's fun to talk to you and reflect upon it. It's great to talk to somebody else because then we get to reflect. And
Yes,
I think that
yeah.
that's the sensuality for me is the key, really.
Mm.
The keyless key.
Yes, I mean, yeah, for every woman living here on this planet, I definitely think we can all relate to, yeah, there's a lot of issues. So yeah, coming back to
Yeah.
this body and like you said, walking barefoot on the earth, just really taking that time and, holding ourselves and letting ourselves be
Yeah.
held by the earth.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I could
Mm.
just say so many things on this topic, but I was just starting to think about the book you wrote. I haven't read it, but yes, is it called Love Lives Under My Skin or
Love is under my
is
skin.
under
Yeah.
my skin? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. This book, I released it now about, mm, gosh, maybe it's about 8 years now since I released the book, and I'm working on a few new ones, but they're slow coming. Because I don't like to push them. But this first book that I wrote, it took me 8 years to write. Because I wrote just slowly and I illustrated it myself and all of that. And it's a little bit of both a memoir of my journey towards this type of a practice, the way I practice, and also some looking into yoga philosophy and different aspects and the asanas from this slightly more round or spherical or wave-like or non-linear point of view.
Mm,
Um, so it's really a little bit of a poem, this book, more than an instruction manual in a way, or an inspiration. Um, but as you say, it's interesting because we really work with that sensual aspect, the feeling sense. And when I say sensual, it's I guess this is my hit topic today, sensuality. But we're really interesting to work with the senses of the body as well, and the eyesight and the hearing and the sense of touch. In a class that I just taught this morning, we were practicing listening, and not listening for anything or to anything, but just in this way, a sense of open listening. And it brings a lot of relaxation to be able to rest into the senses as they perceive, rather before we go into evaluation, which is pretty much automatic. But sometimes we can drop back into that pre-evaluative state through the senses. See what I mean?
mm, yeah. And I think
I
it's
don't
so
know if that
important.
goes to the book, but
Yeah, but it's so important to have someone like you to guide you there. And this book that you wrote can be a great inspiration as a non-manual, but
yeah.
yeah, that sounds
I have to say, I really love the book that I wrote. And it's funny because I know a lot of people will do a creation project and they will look back and say, oh, but that's what I thought then, and this is where I am now. And it is true. There's been some new insights for me since I wrote it, but I'm still really happy that I wrote this book and
Mhm.
that I illustrated this book. It makes me happy that I could express myself in this
Yeah.
way. You know, don't you think that expression is also an important part for a person in their life?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
And oh, yes, that's why we're here to
Yeah,
express ourselves. Yes. And I
yeah,
love this yeah, coming back to who we are, coming back to that space like of non-judgment because we go slip into these automatic ways and coming
mm.
back and like you said, okay, you can look back and maybe regret some things you did in your life or that okay. But like you said, if you didn't create that, maybe you wouldn't have been working on your other books right now. And Yeah.
Hmm.
We got to start somewhere and we can all look back and, oh, I could have changed this or that. But yeah, just being with what is.
Yeah, absolutely. And this it's so, I think, important also to be able to put a voice on things, or to, now this book, of course, I published, I edited it down. There's probably a pile of stuff that I took out of it when I edited it too. But the process, however we
Mm,
express. So for me, excuse me, for me that was a process of getting to know myself through, for me, it worked with journaling, painting, but all that came out of movement, of course. I treated myself when I was working on the last maybe year of it. And I went to Bali for a month, typical, to go to Bali. So, but I went to stay at a friend's cottage on the seaside in Bali. And I would just, for a month, I would move my body, which I say now I move my body, or I let my body move itself. And sometimes yoga asanas come through. Sometimes it looks like a yoga practice, and other times it looks like free movement. Sometimes it looks like dance. So I can't say I did my yoga practice, although that is my yoga practice. Yeah. And then I would roll over and paint a few things or write a few things, definitely staying away from sitting at the desk, and then
mm.
roll back this way. And then I usually roll back somewhere to somebody to feed me. So, because I like that part too, and they cook so nice in Bali. And then, so it was this really kind of nice, luxurious process. And it was very satisfying for me to be able to do that, even if the book never emerged to be published. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm doing now also. It's still basically rolling around, feeling a movement, writing a little bit on it. Now I sit a lot more than rolling too, so I do a lot of sitting meditation. And sometimes also the images and the words come out of there, and sometimes less words as well. So maybe
Mm.
there it's but I think for people right now, it's very important to be able to express, and whatever
Yes.
that expression is, that gives movement to the system to be able to
Mm.
express.
Yeah, I
And
can
sister
definitely
to that is
attest
the
to that.
listening.
Mm. Yeah, the listening is a little bit difficult on Zoom with a little bit
I
of,
know, it's
of
hard.
delay. Sorry. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Yeah, for me too, with this podcast journey, I have definitely gotten to know myself a lot
Yeah.
through this podcast. It's so interesting. And like you said, even though, you know, you might not release an episode or a book or whatever, it's just like, wow, the exploration of self, it's really, really
Yeah.
so important to find your voice. This is a perfect medium
Mm.
for that.
Yeah, it's so good. And you have such a beautiful voice. A couple
Oh,
days ago, I just popped into your podcast to listen to a few, just to kind of tune up for our visit. And I said, wow, this woman has a gorgeous voice. I even
oh,
told my husband, I said, you got to hear this voice. It's a beautiful voice. So,
oh,
yeah.
thank you.
So
Oh
it
my
was so
God.
nice to hear. And that's before I saw you also. So it was
Oh,
really
wow.
beautiful.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Thank you for that. I need to learn to receive more. But
We
yeah,
all do.
yeah, we all need to, but it's so funny that I've had so much, I've had such even now I can't speak. I've had so much difficulty like accepting my own voice even.
Yeah.
Learning a lot of languages, being criticized and perfecting. Like I've lived in Italy too, so we can get into that. But yeah, yeah, I'm now embodying that and owning that. So thank you for that beautiful, beautiful compliment. But
Hmm.
yeah, coming back to your story, you're married to a
Sure.
Norwegian.
Yeah, and I looked hard for a Norwegian because I really wanted a Norwegian husband. I saw when I started coming to these Norwegian to Norway. I as soon as I got to know it, I said, that's the kind of person that I would like to be with." So, and maybe it's a generalization, but um, I like a lot the Norwegian people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I having lived in Italy, I can definitely see that. I've met a lot of guys from all over the world, and the the Norwegian guys in general are pretty epic.
Yeah. And I was in Maui, like I told you, and then I'm one of these classic cases of the person that moves for love.
Hmm.
So I moved to Italy for love. I met an Italian man that was from Milano, and I moved and married that Milanese guy. And that worked out for a while, and then didn't work out after a while. And then I met Ula and moved to Norway. So um, love is one of my motivators too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh
I
my
know
God.
what you're going through with those Italian men, which are spicy and great and passionate, aren't they? Um,
Oh yeah, they're a whole different genre, that's for sure.
isn't it fascinating that within a 2-hour flight we can have so different character of people, hmm? And also good people and good-hearted people, but the persona is so different from place to place, don't you? It's so fascinating, huh?
It's so fascinating. Yeah, it's mind-blowing to me, actually. But yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, congratulations on your Norwegian guy
Thank you.
and finding love. That's amazing. So yeah,
Hmm.
before COVID, I guess you spent a lot of time in your house in Sardinia, which is in
Hmm.
what's it in English? Sardinia. Is it?
I think in English they call it Sardinia,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're all on
So
the
an
same page.
island. Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
An island about the is it the latitude of Rome, about that height at the top of the island, yeah. And about at the bottom of the island it'd be around below Naples, kind of.
Mm.
So nice temperate. I think there's a million people and 6 million sheep on that island. So it's very, very rural.
Yeah, and I've lived in Rome for many years. I have never been to Sardinia, which is such a shame. But for people who don't know, Sardinia is they have like a completely different dialect. It's almost
Yeah,
like
they
a
do.
language of its own. Like I went to theater school or an academy in Rome with a guy from Sardinia, and he was just
Okay.
like talking to me like, me and you, Iselin, we're both strangers here.
Yeah.
we're both
Yeah.
foreigners. Sorry,
Mm.
but yeah,
Yeah.
and I was just like,
Stranieri.
stranieri. Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
thinking about. This is the thing with
Mm.
languages. I mess up
Yeah.
sometimes. It's okay. Yeah,
Oh, you
so
didn't
that's
mess
fun.
up. It just brings more in. Yeah, the Sardinian have their own language, and I don't understand it. I don't speak it, but it's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Also how far away that island is, also from what they call the mainland of Italy as well. Yeah, I bought a little tiny olive grove on the west coast of Sardinia, and with a what they call a rustico, or just one room little. It's like a hitta in Norwegian, of course, a one room
Mm.
hitta, and a place to be in nature, and just a few kilometers from the sea, off the grid experiment. That was so fascinating to do that. So we still have this little cottage there. We don't go back and forth so much now because of the COVID, but it's a really beautiful place to be in nature. And
Mm.
once I this little journey of being with this Italian man, and then finishing that relationship, I went to my place in Sardinia to, in a way, also find myself again after that relationship. Um, and it was so fascinating because I spent that first year in Sardinia. This was over 10 years ago now, maybe 12, 13 years, making, just working in the earth and taking, they make these natural bricks out of something called trachite. It's just a brick that come out of the stones from that island. And I bought a whole bunch of these, and I just kept making borders and walls with these bricks all around. I didn't really realize what I was doing while I was there, but making garden beds or making borders. And then after about a year, I said, wow, this was my border making year in a way. Um, so it's so interesting to see what we really make our yoga. And sometimes we
Mm.
can also just kind of make stuff up, but in retrospect, I could see that that was what I really needed to, is to work the land, get grounded, make borders, make boundaries for myself that in retrospect got overrun a little bit. So in a way, our yoga practice can come into things that don't necessarily always look like the asana or look like pranayama, but also how we're living through our life and the symbols that we're putting out there in our life. To me, they're important in a practice. That said, I don't think that they say, well, then I can just do that and not do movement, because we need to move our bodies. We need to have the time to have our introspective practices as well, you know? So interesting just to see how life moves and what we do at certain times. Don't you think?
Yeah, it's very fascinating, this life journey. That is for sure. Yeah. So
I remember you saying that you went to Rome kind of to balance out, in a way, what was a more ascetic or more pulled back or monastic kind of a lifestyle, or strict, maybe it was from your dance, a more strict lifestyle in a way, right?
yeah,
And then you went to do the Julia Roberts thing.
yeah. Or Elizabeth Gilbert thing. Yeah, the eat, pray,
Yeah, exactly.
pray, love thing. Yeah. Yeah, definitely growing up in the darkness up north, it was definitely a show. Literally wearing all my dresses, prancing around the streets of Rome, enjoying the sunshine, and of course, oh yes, all the Italian food. Oh my God, I'm obsessed.
It sounds like a good balancing out, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, now I was planning on going back to Italy last year, and yeah, now I'm rooting down deeply into my hometown, Bergen. And yeah, also enjoying the luxury of having amazing Italian food. Pizzaioli, pizza makers from Naples are
They're in
living here.
Bergen.
Yeah.
That's
So
great.
yeah, taking these little trips out when we can.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for you.
Yeah. But the work, like you've also been working in Italy, like sharing your work there. So I don't know if you want to share some stories, or I've seen that you have Tantra per le donne, Tantra for women. Like you said, mostly women show up to your work.
Yeah. The Tantra for Women course is specifically I do for women, where we work that particular one is going to be in Italian, because one of my Italian students asked me if I would propose that online while everybody's locked down. And what better thing to practice when you're locked down but touching into yourself, I guess, if you can, We also have 2 live years of that, one happening in Bergen starting in September, and one happening in Oslo starting in May. Fingers crossed that we'll be able to do those with all the rules and all of that. But it's interesting to work in Italy because, like we said before, it's very different. The persona, the core of people is very often the same. The heart, the empathy, the intention when they come to a course to touch into themselves. Yet the persona and the cultural persona is so different from south to north, and Italy to Norway to Germany, that I've been teaching in a lot, to the US is a whole nother story. And from Italy how the Italians are quite passionate in a way. So it's very outward energy quite often. So working in Italy, I work a little different than I work here in a way. In Italy, we get to sort of there's no way. Italians really love to talk a lot. Yeah. This is a generalization, but it is sort of true. Italians love to. I remember I lived in Firenze in Florence for some years, way, way, way back with another Italian. I had a little Italian phase. And I lived in Firenze, and we went to an Iyengar yoga class of a very famous Iyengar teacher. Her name is Gabriele Jubilaro, something like that. I think it's Gabriele Jubilaro. And at the time, she was one of the hotshot Iyengar teachers. This is back 20 years ago, perhaps. And I remember really being very excited to go to her class as a student because I was very curious to know more about Iyengar and practice with this very high-level teacher. And I went in, and it was not quite the glamorous yoga studios we have now, just a kind of a sweaty gym room, and with a lot of sort of old ladies in there. It wasn't also our cute yoga clothes. Everybody was just in their, in Italian, remember how they call la tuta, just their gym, like kind of a gym outfit. And Gabriella was teaching headstands at that time. And so I was going in there being a proper American, and I'm going to do my headstand because at the time I was quite competent at that. And she got everybody else in their headstands, and they were trading recipes while they were in their headstands, and they were talking and talking. And at first I couldn't understand. I said, "Why are these people talking about?" And I thought, are they arguing while they're in headstands? And then my boyfriend at the time, he says, no, they're not arguing. Just listen. And then I hear the word carciofi, carciofi, carciofi. And so, which means, as you know, artichoke. And so then all of a sudden I was getting artichoke recipes while we were in the headstand, So, and this was just commonplace. So they would do this until they'd settle down and then go into the practice and then that. And I really learned that, for example, you can't stop that group from talking. They just have to kind of let it move, I guess, express, and then it filters down. Whereas in the Northern, there's maybe a little bit more priming the pump for expression to happen. And in my experience, generally in the Northern groups, is there will be a little bit more inhibition or reservation for exchange. But then when that starts to gently open up, it's the same as when the Italian or the Southern groups start to kind of come closer. Then it's really the same. Then the human contact is the same. So it's so fascinating to work
my God,
that
that's
way.
so funny because I've done 2 teacher trainings in Italy, and oh my God, with other international students as well. And it's so funny to see because I even said that to my other teacher, like, oh my God, I talk a lot. That's why I have this podcast. But I definitely think I unlocked the key to my throat chakra in Italy, actually. Talking in Italian. I was already talking it with my hands before I learned the language. And yes, well, they definitely beat me at talking. That is so true.
Some of my favorite groups have been when I have groups, we come together, for example, in a summer retreat or something like that, where it's people from all different nationalities, like you said in your teacher training. And once everybody sort of finds what each other's personality is, but then we go into hands-on work, body work. A lot of times in the summers, hopefully we can do it again after COVID. After we find our ways, we do work in the warm water. So a lot of times we'll have people that are, as an Italian holding a Norwegian floating in warm water, or a Swedish holding a German, and at that moment, just like the water does, it just totally dissolves any boundaries, any cultural boundaries. There is another language that can happen. Also, and this is sort of a somatic practice, another language that can happen when we touch into our humanity in a way, and not only our cultural.
Yes.
I love the cultural for the spice of life. It makes things funny and fun, and it would be very boring if we were all exactly homogenous, But there's something that gives me a lot of hope or faith. I don't know if faith's the right word, but hope, when people with so many different, it could be a person in her 70s holding from Germany, holding a 25-year-old or floating a 25-year-old in warm water from Denmark. And there's a meeting because human contact, And I think it's so important, this human contact. It's a little bit frightening to see what's happening now. I'm real curious what's going to happen around human contact and how we're going to find our way back.
Yes, it's going to be interesting. And we'll definitely be needing this work. For sure. We'll find a way, like you said. Definitely. Yeah. Whew, I need to do a exhale. Just
Yeah.
thinking about
Yeah.
that. But yeah, maybe going back a bit to your journey, and I mean talking to you who've been practicing, for so long, it's just like maybe difficult to just like mention some things along the way. I know you met Osho pretty young and that he changed the course of your life.
Hmm. Hmm. For who doesn't know who is Osho? Osho was he's left the body, and I met Osho and his teachings of Osho after he'd already left the body. So I never met Osho physically. Let's put
Mm.
it that way. Energetically, I feel like I've been in a close contact with this teacher. And he was a controversial guru from India that got, also known as Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, that got quite well known throughout the world, but especially in the United States, sort of as a guru that pushed limits and pushed cultural boundaries. He also had many, many forms of meditation that he proposed that were active meditations, from shaking or sounding or humming or dancing. Um, and many of these meditations were made so you would shake or you would dance or you would hum or you would shout or gibberish before you would become still. And he created these active meditations. Some people know it as dynamic meditation, because the Western psyche and the Western energetic system isn't like the Eastern one anymore. We're really in a different age as Westerners. So some people are suited to the old way of, or the antique way of practicing. I would say some people are very suited to that, and that is whatever, that's their tendency. Some people can go sit in a cave. Not that many, but some can do that. And some people have to try it to figure out that they can't, and then they try something else. Um, but we have, so I was really immersed in the world of Osho from one of my first partners, who has introduced me to Osho. And I could say that the gift I got from Osho and the teachings of Osho and the practice of Osho were two things. The first was to start to loosen up my rigidity, that not everything's so darn serious
Mm.
and has to be such a certain way. He was very, very paradoxical. He would have us do one thing, and then the next day he'd say, nope, not that anymore, do this, to kind of keep swinging between the
Yeah.
polarities. So we didn't get so dogmatic about one thing. This is how we meditate. We can also meditate like this. This is how we grow. We can also grow like this. So it was very present moment, very alive. And the second thing I really learned from Osho was he used to say to don't listen to his words, but to listen to the space between his words when he spoke. We become so focused on a teaching in a way that, oh, I should do it this way. And sometimes specific teachings can be really helpful. We need the guide, we need the containment, we need the island to sit on for a little while before we can feel a little more free in it, you know? But then we get a little stuck sometimes. I would say I get a little stuck on the thing to do. Whereas with the yoga practice, with a tantra practice, with a meditation practice, it's really not about doing. It's about the doing is a technique to free us up from the doing. At least that's my experience. So that was one of the most important things I learned from Osho. Learned, unlearned.
Mm. Yes.
And it keeps coming back with my present teachers are Danish teachers. Um, and I hear the same, not that they're repeating his words, but I hear the same message over and over.
Mm.
And I recognize how easy it is to get rigid, you know? And
Yeah.
then I get a little reminder to loosen up, a little, loosen the effort. Patanjali Yoga Sutras also talk about, this is my favorite sutra from Patanjali, which is an ancient text, as you know. about yoga practice. And one of the says that the means of perfecting the asana is the physical forms. I say it also maybe for listeners that maybe don't know the words, but the physical forms of yoga that we're doing, the means of perfecting the asana is to loosen the effort.
Mm.
And
That,
that's so important for me, not to fall apart, not to collapse, not just oh blah, although we can do that sometimes too. But what if you were practicing a form, a downward facing dog, because everybody knows that, but we loosen the effort around what it has to be like, and it gets soft and shaping and back to sensual, then my senses are open to respond to what's happening in that shaping inside and out. Then I
mm.
become more then it becomes a training to become responsive to life. See what I mean?
Yes, definitely. We all need to let that sink in.
Mm. Let me tell
And
you, Iselin,
yeah,
also I have to let that sink in.
yeah.
The reason I practice it is because I need it more than anybody, just to say, so I don't make some picture that I'm so loose. I practice because I'm not so loose. I would say that I'm right up there on the top 10 of control freaks on planet Earth.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
I definitely have had these tendencies too, and can slip back into them. But it's like you said, it's about the unlearning for me too. When I first read a book by Osho, I was really into philosophy and just like trying to, I need to find my path and get on this secure train to bring me to the destiny, the thing we've been conditioned to look for.
yeah.
Now we're realizing this in these times that that's not maybe that easy. It's all fluid and changing.
Mm,
That's the only thing that we know for sure, is that it's
mm,
everything is changing. But yeah, and that whole led me to a whole journey of unlearning. So yeah,
mm,
he was pretty influential, or his words really, really, really influential. And then I started going into the yoga philosophy and my yogic studies. So that's really
mm,
interesting. And then you mentioned your current teachers. I don't know if you want to talk more about that.
sure. My current teacher right now is a woman named Helen Gamborg, and she's maybe not so well known outside of Scandinavia. Um, and she is I visit a lot a spiritual center in Denmark called the Vext Center. I probably don't say it right because in Danish I definitely can't do it.
It
but
sounds about right in
and this
Norwegian. So
okay, good. And this is a small center where it is landed in work, growth, and self development. So it's based in the teachings of a Tibetan Buddhism lineage, and but also modified for the Western mind. So it makes it quite accessible for the Western mind. And Helen is one of my teachers there, who is really, really knowledgeable and experienced in working with the human energy field and in healing and meditation, of course. So she's a wonderful woman. You would think of her as the best aunt you ever wanted to have, or the best next door neighbor. And she's a wise woman and a warm woman, and so supportive. So um, learning a lot from her all the time. Yeah.
mm, yeah, she sounds amazing.
Yeah. You know,
So
something
yeah.
interesting about this whole thing is I heard from a Tibetan, I think I heard it in an interview somewhere, but some of the Tibetan teachers, when they started to come to the West back in the 60s, when they came from Tibet, proposing their Tibetan Buddhism. Um, at first, now they're a little bit more sophisticated, but they were really quite Tibetan when they first started to come, and they couldn't understand some of the behaviors and the mindsets of the Westerners. I hope that I get the story right. I remember hearing the Dalai Lama say that when he first saw people smoking, it, it was like, why would people smoke? It was maybe they used for ritual or something like that, but to do just recreational smoking cigarettes like Westerners do, he couldn't understand why one would actually create a harm to their system, like cigarettes can do. And he also, I'm pretty sure it was Dalai Lama, couldn't understand the nature of addiction
Mm. Wow.
because that hadn't been a part of the ego structure from the East or from Tibet. Maybe there would be other things that weren't so balanced, but addiction wasn't a part of it. And also self-judgment. I heard from another teacher, I think it was Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, said he couldn't understand why people would judge themselves. It was like not just oh, that's not nice for you. Like it went over his head. What is this behavior that Westerners are doing? So it's so interesting that our ego structure and psyche structure is different than the
Mm.
East. So really, it's a fertile time to kind of play between how we can bring the wisdom of the East and meet it with also our strong points from the West and see where they blend and adapt without losing also the wisdom. It's really interesting to me.
It's so interesting, so fascinating. That whole self-judgment thing, and oh my God, the addictions, we're all drowning in it in these times.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So maybe it has something to do also with our lack of connection, you know, or lack of community, because that part in the Tibetan culture, in the more ancient cultures, that was a given that people took care of each other in a way.
Mm.
And I'm sure there was also a backside. We're not saying it was total utopia, but in that way, their ego structure really was around. Is maybe it's changing now, but was around take the collective in a way. Um, Now probably probably they're facing little changes themselves because
Mm.
of so much of the West coming into the East.
Yeah,
It's a blending time.
it definitely is, which brings up a lot of chaos. But I,
Mm.
from my experience living in Italy, I could see how we are very individualistic up here in
Mm.
Scandinavia. I don't know if
Mm.
you, being an American, having lived in Italy as well and traveled around the world, I don't know if you have any observations or like you were talking about community, the importance of that.
Mm. Well, I would say that America, the U.S., is probably the most individualistic country that exists on the planet. So,
Yeah.
I come from this place where, as you probably know, we put if we do good in school, we get the bumper sticker that said, "My kid got A's at such and such high school." And I understand in Norway and in Scandinavia, the jantelov is kind of the flip side of that. Neither one is too much in balance. So it's interesting the balance between the individual and the community. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We're not supposed to brag that much, too much about ourselves, definitely, and not make too much out of ourselves. I've definitely been
Yeah.
trained to, you have to tone down easily. Don't be so
Yeah.
loud, don't be so crazy. And yeah, I could definitely feel that when I was in Italy. I felt sometimes when were in these big groups, like, oh my God, I'm so
Mm.
Norwegian, stay away.
The
I
sense of
need my
space is
space.
different, huh?
The
Yeah.
feeling of
So
space
different.
is pretty
Mm.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Mm.
the I wanted to ask you more. Well, I guess you've already mentioned some of the people who inspires you in your work, in
Mm.
your life. But I don't know if you want to mention someone or something else we haven't already talked about.
Yeah. I would have to say that in my work in yoga somatics, Emily Conrad from Continuum Movement was a pivotal moment to shift from a linear practice and drop that and move into something that was so non-linear. Now I've come back sort of half-half and there's a balance, but with Emily we just let go of all form and went into what was always changing form, into the fluid. So continuum movement was a really important piece for me, and her teaching was a really important piece. And yeah, and I would say also then my current teacher, Helen. has been so important because she's really brought me to be in contact with trusting my heart and being myself and taking my own choices. You know, everybody has to go their own way, in a way. One thing I learned from her through her teacher, Bob Moore, who was a great healer, was that there's not one energy system, bioenergy, meaning your etheric and your astral and all the unseen parts of who we are as an energetic being. No one's energetic system is alike. We're all unique, just like our bodies. We might look a little bit like somebody else, but we're so unique. There's no two energy systems the same. So, for example, in yoga, when we talk about chakras and nadis and all these streams, those streams, there are tendencies for them to move in certain ways and to be balanced. Yet, your root chakra will always have a little bit different imprint than mine. Not because it's better or worse, just because we're unique. So, when we work with movement, when we work with pranayama, when we work with healing, for me as a teacher, it's always been very important to be very sensitive to help a person sense themselves rather than me tell them, you should feel this way. That's been really important for me and a gift from my teachers to help me understand that we are so unique. We can also say, well, let's try this out. What would it feel like if you would move this way? Or let your arm go this way instead of this way, just as an experiment. You know, we don't only do arms, but just to make it up for here. Because then a person can start to reflect on themselves in a way. So it's been so important for me to understand how different we really are.
Yeah.
And how different I am to everybody else. But I have a place in the big web.
Definitely. And yeah, that's so, so, so important because a lot of people will tend to teach that way, that you should feel like this, and then people feel like there's something wrong with them if they don't feel calm after a pranayama exercise, for instance. So I think that's an important message to get out there. There's nothing wrong with you. We're just different.
It takes a little practice also, as for who, because I know you probably have a lot of yoga teachers and movement teachers listening, and I'm not perfect at it all the time, but it takes a little practice to find the way, not only to articulate and say the words, but to really let it be, to let a person be as they are, and give a person the space to learn in their own time and to help them to find the way to learn in their own way. We all learn differently too, you know?
Yes.
So it takes a little practice, but it's really worth it, because then as a teacher, for who is a yoga teacher out there or whatever teacher, then you get something back, because it's not just a one direction, do this thing. Like if I say, okay, everybody do it like this, and then you will feel this, and then so that's kind of one direction. If I give some space for feedback, for interaction, and the feedback may not be verbal, it may simply be energetic, it may be what I see, what I hear, then I also get fed. It's much less of a battle, or much less of a polarity, and more of a more this and that. Of course, the teacher is in the role of a guide. So it's not to let go of that role completely. The person needs that as well for a while. I would hate it if my teacher just said, I don't know, do whatever you want. And I'd be like, hey, but I need some guidance here, you know? But I would also not like it anymore if the teacher said, you do it like this, or I abandon you, and you're a bad student if you don't. You see? So there's sort of this balance, and it feeds back. We get feedback.
It's definitely a balance of these tendency that we try to unlearn. You know, we have to fix things all the time, fix people. You know, you all should feel like this. It's just like that whole goal oriented, and just instead of being in the process. And it's so fascinating that what you said. It's been so enlightening to me. Like, we're already whole and complete. You know, we just need to have the space, that healing container of figuring it out ourselves. Like we know the way, but having someone to guide you, someone to sit with you and create that space is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a small baby, we're probably coming close to the end of our time, but I remember when I don't remember this experience, but reflecting back, when I was born, it was very fashionable to get your baby on their feet and walking as soon as possible. You know, you had a smart, clever baby if you could walk faster or potty train faster, or, you know, it was a sort of an achievement oriented. And I do remember that some pictures of some things that got me on my feet in a way. They had some little strollers or some little jumpy things where you put the kid in a jumpy thing, the little baby, and just my toes would touch the earth like this, not the soles of my feet, which is important for a baby to be able to press through the soles of their feet, pull themselves up, fall down, press through the soles of their feet. And so I was thinking that if I didn't really get the chance to learn how to stand up on my own, my parents just kind of pulled me up and just walk, walk, walk. And finally, I guess I figured, well, if I'm going to survive in this family, I better keep walking. I better do so. I better just be really clever, you know, otherwise I'm going to get left behind. And, but I didn't learn how to stand up on my own. So I've spent the last maybe 10, 15 years really practicing standing up on my own, also in my nervous system and through my physical body. We relearn some of these developmental patterns as children in yoga somatics. Yet at the same time, I would have been very not good if my parents would have just stuck me in a room and said, figure it out yourself. So it's really a balance, you know?
That's so interesting. There's still...
So we learn it as small babies.
Oh my God. Yes. Also, it still is that way, I guess. You know, how old were your child when it could walk? You know, people still ask these questions and put photos up and having to prove how intelligent or smart their baby is, which is kind of sad. But but
there's many methods, huh?
Many ways. Many ways and methods. But what are I'm curious to know more about your self-care routines as a teacher and just a human being.
Yeah. I would say that sort of my physical self-care routines really change with the season and with my changing of age and changing into menopause and many things like that. So those are quite fluctuating, you know, what I do for my body. But I recognize one thing that I've done for as long as I can remember. And when I go to sleep at night, right before I fall asleep, I say thank you for this day. And I note, and when I wake up in the morning before I sit on my meditation cushion, because that's the first thing I do in my morning, on 98% of my mornings is meditation, I say, good morning, masters. And these are just my little words that I made up, but these are ways to touch into something that is, for me, beyond just my limited self, and to recognize the support of the beyond. And to me, that is really a self-care for me, that I think I can carry through any age, any health, any condition, any place. So I would say those two little bookends are my most important self-care for me. Then they'll lead me to other things.
Practices, yes. Oh, I love that. Yes. So important how you greet the day and how you close it off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, I just love hearing people's approach, and just I'm so inspired, and I got so many insights talking to you. And
it's nice to talk together.
Yes, it is. Oh yes, we found a way. Thanks internet. Thanks exactly. Technology. Yes. So it's been it's been it is interesting talking online, but it is a way, and it's a way I'm learning to love, because otherwise, we're all in different places and time zones and all of that. But now we actually get the chance. It's easier for us also to connect and talk.
I agree. Yeah. There is a new way of connecting that's happening through this. Like, it's a strange thing, but I agree.
Yeah. So it's going to be so interesting to see how we move forward from this, and yeah, the role in the somatics in all of this too. I mean, all of your knowledge and expertise, and it's very much needed in this time, I think. So yeah, I'm going to remind people that all of your links are below to your book or your training and everything, Ateeka.
Thank you. It's been so nice to talk to you, and it's a nice opportunity for me to reflect also on things that are important for me. So it's a little selfish in a funny way. So thank you for that, and good to meet you, and thank you for what you're doing also to create channels and communication for people to reflect and share and listen. It's really nice what you're doing.
Oh, thank
With
you.
your
Thank you
beautiful
so
voice.
much. Oh, thank you. Oh.